Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today we gotta talk about the Janksgiving event that happened on Cenk's Nephew's live stream, where on Thanksgiving Day, Cenk Uygur comes on stream and they argue about the issues of the day. And we're specifically going to highlight the crime segment of this particular live stream because Cenk's nephew basically goes through every single stupid, non-accurate crime denial tactic point, and I think it's hilarious to watch Cenk be confronted by somebody who essentially represents his own position from years ago. Now, we're going to get into this. We're going to break this whole thing down. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
So right off the top, I do think it is notable that in the chapter sections on this particular channel, in which I downloaded the entire video, this section is labeled the crime panic. So even the editor who puts together this video, who does the chapters on Cenk's nephew's channel, has decided to embrace the full crime denial tactics. Now, Cenk leads it off with a slew of evidence to show that crime definitely did impact the election, and specifically in the state of California. And we've talked about many of these ballot initiatives and many of these local races. Although, to be clear, Cenk did leave out quite a few elections, quite a few results that would have better supported his point.
So let's do crime. Did crime have, you and I had a huge debate about it, and you thought it's not going to affect elections, and it obviously did affect elections, Haas. So, I mean, here in California, first of all, Donald Trump picked up 10 counties overall. He closed the gap between Kamala Harris and himself massively in California. George Gascon lost 60-40. The mayor of London Breed, mayor of San Francisco, lost overwhelmingly. The mayor of Oakland got recalled 65-35. Prop 36 passed with a 70% approval. Yeah. So the Democratic voters of California said, yes, crime is real. And yes, we hate it and do not want more crime. We want less crime. Those are Democratic voters.
So in addition to the races that Cenk ended up highlighting right there, I will also point out that the Alameda District Attorney, Pamela Price, who's one of the worst, most left-wing district attorneys in the entire country, was also recalled. This also follows up San Francisco, a bastion of progressivism, recalling Chesa Boudin a few years ago. So obviously, the backlash to the Black Lives Matter project, the defund the police initiatives is real, and it is based on a spike in crime. However, Cenk's nephew is going to distract from this issue, and essentially what his argument boils down to, spoiler alert, and this is true for each and every single topic, is that the left wing doesn't need to acknowledge the realities of crime. They don't need to acknowledge in another segment the realities of male trans athletes competing against females. What they need to do is frame things differently, because the issue that many Americans have is that they're not propagandized enough against the idea that crime is a big issue. And I will just point out that the left has been trying this for years and years and years, and it hasn't worked. So Cenk's nephew is pitching a failed strategy, a crime denial strategy, and I want to go over every aspect of his crime denial. But first, let's talk about the pivot off the issue.
So can I ask you something? Do you think that Californians love involuntary servitude, also known as slavery, in their prison structure?
So no, you guys, that's exactly my point, Huss. So that's a
they voted for it.
No, hold on. There's a prop that Hassan's talking about here in California that basically said we should get rid of slavery in the prisons, and it lost. And that's terrible that it lost. And my thesis on why it lost, when of course the Democratic voters of California, if they understood what that meant, would say, oh no, I don't want slavery in prisons, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But they voted against almost every left-wing ballot measure, including minimum wage, because they thought, oh, the left wing is the extreme wing. They're the pro-crime wing. They're the pro-super extreme positions. So even if I'm a California Democrat, I'm voting no on everything. If a Democrat proposes it, no. And that's why we got slaughtered in this election.
So Cenk actually gives a pretty good answer in response to this. And for those of you guys who are unaware, there was a proposition on the California ballot that sought to end forced labor or compelled labor in the California prisons. It was framed as the ending of slavery. However, many a commenter on this channel told me when I referenced this particular ballot initiative before that these prisoners were actually being paid to do this work. And even though this law actually had no opposition to it, there were no defined groups representing the counter position, because the woke criminal justice policies have become so toxic in the state of California, it was actually defeated, and defeated handily. And by the way, when they talked about Prop 36, which is a repeal of 2014's Prop 47, the repeal not only won by 70% of the vote in the state of California, but it actually won in each and every county in California. It was a decisive victory from top to bottom, because everyone understands that retail theft and all these different various crimes are completely out of hand in California, and this soft on crime approach that Cenk's nephew advocates for has been toxic electorally.
My point is that the way you frame things certainly matter. It matters a lot, because most people are not paying attention to anything. That's why you had people searching if Joe Biden had dropped the day before the election. That's why communication matters. That's why who you define as your enemies matter. But if we're going to talk about, so perception is important, and narrative in many instances is more important than the truth, right? We agree with that, especially in this day and age.
So framing matters a tremendous amount. We agree.
Yeah, framing matters a tremendous amount, and also narrative is more important than the truth. I think this is something that you would agree with as well.
Then again, you get into short run, long run, but yeah, it's super important.
It is. I mean, this is a
narrative. This is super important.
This is almost a callback to the Alan Lichtman conversation, right? Like, disinformation played a big role. It's not just disinformation. It's also information that's coming out of like legitimate sources with authority, like legitimate outlets of information that people still trust, like their local news stations. 90% of it is owned by Sinclair Broadcasting. They're super right wing. Yada yada, but also newspapers, national newspapers, things that people care about. Fox News now dominates the media consumption by 73%. Last time I checked. It's an insane number.
So Cenk's nephew ends up going into this line of argumentation that basically is a denial of crime. What he's saying is that the local news is giving people the perception that crime is absolutely terrible, and in reality, that is not supported by the data. Now, there is polling that is out there that showed that voters exiting the polls are under the mistaken belief that crime is near all-time highs, and honestly, the left has made too much of this. What that poll indicates is that people understand that crime is rising. It has been up since the Black Lives Matter riots, and that, despite the denials from Cenk's nephew and the broader left, is 100% true. However, of course it's not as bad as the 1990s. That's the worst period in American history, but I can forgive the American people for being asked a question in exit polls, answering that question wrong when the 1990s, when crime was at all-time highs, was 30 years ago, when the great crime wave in the United States of America in the late 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, again, was 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Right? So in that process, something that fell apart for the Democrats in their unwillingness to actually fight back and counter message on anything because they're cowardly was the issue of crime. There's been a lot of analysis on why crime rates have gone down historically, and they have completely rebounded and are trending downwards once again, as they have since the 90s, which I know you're going to get mad at, but hold on. And that most surveys conducted on the matter show that Americans think that their neighborhoods, and the crime has not increased in their neighborhoods, but actually crime has increased elsewhere. So why do they think that they're safe in their neighborhoods, but they still feel like crime is exploding in the country? I think it is because of the right-wing misinformation faucet that is completely dominating independent media and completely dominating even major newspapers, and that everyone is constantly in a holding pattern on whatever Republicans decide is the major point that they want to argue for.
Now, to be clear, Cenk's nephew likes to frame himself as outside of the establishment, as somebody who's proposing a new way of thinking, an alternative method of fighting back against those dastardly Republicans that will definitely work, but the Democrats just never pursue that. But the fact of the matter is, we've gone over this for years on this channel. Each and every one of these progressives, each and every one of these Democrats, mainstream media, have all tried tried to do the same thing. It tried to tell you that crime is actually down historically compared to the 1990s, and you shouldn't worry about the recent crime spike in the United States of America because it's no big deal. When in reality, what we see in the data represented nationwide is that crime is up since the Black Lives Matter riots. And by the way, I have said this in the face of bad data coming out from the FBI, which I will get into a little bit later, and that FBI data has since been amended to reflect the criticisms that I had of said data. And it's a unusual amending of the data for the FBI to do, but it's a perfectly predictable amending of that data based on the fact that they changed their data collection methods, and obviously that was producing negative results that anybody who is examining it with a keen eye could actually see. In fact, I have glasses and I could see it.
Not only has the crime rate actually gone down, and I think you recognize that as well, the National Crime Victimization Survey does not show like a major blip in unreported crimes. There is definitely more unreported crimes than before, and we can address why that's happening as well.
So one of the things I absolutely love about Cenk's nephew is the fact that he tries to weasel around and never say anything specific when it comes to the topics that he's trying to address and he's trying to debunk. And a perfect example of that is the fact that he said that, listen, the National Victimization Survey doesn't actually show a major blip in unreported crimes. I mean, there's definitely maybe an increase in unreported crimes across this country, and there are reasons for that, but it's not a major blip. But the thing is, we've actually covered this on this channel multiple different times, and even the Council on Criminal Justice, which is a left-wing organization that often puts forward the same reforms that Cenk's nephew advocates for, does in fact show that we've seen a dramatic increase in unreported crimes when you compare the National Crime Victimization Survey to the Uniform Crime Report. And part of the reason for this, in my estimation, is the fact that the Uniform Crime Report changed its data collection method to the National Incident-Based Reporting System from the Summary Reporting System, which is what it did previous. So a lot of these people who cited a crime drop in the UCR never acknowledged the fact that the UCR completely changed its data collection method, and obviously there were going to be problems with that data collection method. And in fact, what we've seen is the fact that the FBI had to revise all those crime statistics to show that crime had actually gone up. And this is totally predictable based on the fact that they had to normalize the statistical gathering method from the previous way to the current way. But specifically, the claim was that the National Crime Victimization Survey did not show a dramatic or a major uptick in unreported crimes, and that is completely false. Again, we go to this article and I will give you the percentages and, of course, the proportional percentages that we've seen a drop in reporting in the various categories.
The National Crime Victimization Survey does not show like a major blip in unreported crimes.
So in 2021, approximately 52% of serious violent crimes were reported to the police, but in 2022, that number dropped to 48%. That is a relative decrease of nearly 8% in the reporting of those serious violent crimes. Now, of course, the decline was higher in specific categories because aggravated assault, 61% of those were reported in 2021 compared to 50% in 2022, and that is a decrease of 18%. Again, these are relative decreases. I understand that many of you will look at that and say, no, that's an 11% decrease, but we're talking relative to the previous percentage of reported. Now, why is it important that we saw these relative decreases in reportings of crime? Again, 8% for overall violent crime, and then 18% specifically for aggravated assault. Well, the reason why this is crucial for us to understand is because a decrease in the violent crime rate, when you're seeing a dramatic decrease in the reporting of violent crime, may not be a decrease at all. And when you compare the charts from the Uniform Crime Report to the National Crime Victimization Survey, what you see is an increase of violent crime instances where the Uniform Crime Report shows a decrease. So again, you look at this chart and you see see the minus 2% from the UCR, and that is counterbalanced with a 75% increase in the National Crime Victimization Survey data. When you go to homicides, it's minus 7% from the UCR, but to be clear, dead people don't fill out surveys very well, so you had 0% change from the NCVS. For rape, minus 6% compared to an NCVS data sample that shows up 58%, for robbery up 1%, and then you have up 47%, and for aggravated assault, which is the category that saw the most dramatic drop in reporting, you go from minus 2% to 104%. Now look, divergence between the UCR and the National Crime Victimization Survey happens from time to time. We essentially use the NCVS to check our data in terms of the reported data, and usually we go with that or a mixture of the two, but this dramatic of a divergence is obviously indicative of problems with the data in terms of the UCR. And by the way, this was proven out by the later revisions of the FBI, which ended up going from a minus 2 that you see right here on this chart to plus 4% in total overall violent crime in the United States of America. And it is very obvious that because we have the same statistical problems in 2022 that we had in 2023, that we are likely to get a revision for that data as well. So nothing in the national data actually indicates that we are seeing a return to normalcy from the post Black Lives Matter period, even though we are seeing a drop in homicide because we saw a 30% year-over-year increase in homicide during the Black Lives Matter riot era, which is 2020, which then went up again in 2021. We are not normalized to where we were pre-Black Lives Matter, pre-2020.
You know, not only has the crime rate actually gone down, and I think you recognize that as well, the National Crime Victimization Survey does not show like a major blip in unreported crimes.
So when Cenk's nephew says crime is down, no, that is not actually true. Even the FBI data that indicated that crime was down was revised to show that it was up. And then he says, oh, there's no big divergence between the National Crime Victimization Survey and the Uniform Crime Report. That is also false. You can see it for yourself. And when he says that there is no significant drop in reporting or no major drop in reporting, that is also false, as represented again by the Council on Criminal Justice, which is a very left-wing criminal justice organization that advocates for reform. So his denial of crime is even beyond what we expect from left-wing organizations. And for me to make that statement, his claims should be easily proven false by the data. And guess what? They are proven false by the data.
But overall, the real reason why I think a lot of people see crime everywhere, and especially in cities, in my opinion, even though Republican and red states have significantly higher rates of crime than states like California do, the reason why most people fall into this trap of assuming that California is a crime hole as opposed to like a place like Alabama or a place like South Carolina, despite the fact that they have higher rates of crime and including violent crime than California does, is because narrative is more important than the actual truth.
So Cenk's nephew immediately jumps into another crime denial tactic, another crime deflection tactic, which is to say, look, these red states like Alabama, these red states like Louisiana, these red states like Mississippi actually have a much higher rates of violent crime than a place like California, and they're just trying to label the blue state of California crime-ridden and focus on cities for some odd unknown reason, and that doesn't make any sense at all. Now, obviously, this is the deflection, this is a denial tactic for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it says nothing about the relative increase or decrease in crime, which is what people are monitoring. Secondly, the reason we talk about crime on a local level, the reason we talk about crime on a city level or a county level is because the overwhelming majority of the political officials that deal with the problem of crime are on a local, municipality, county, or city level. Your police departments are local. They are not directly controlled by the state in the overwhelming majority of cases. So it makes sense for you to pin crime on your state's attorney, on your prosecutor, on your city attorney, or on your county attorney, whatever you call them in your particular area, because they are the person in charge of prosecuting those particular cases. If Gascon, which is the district attorney for Los Angeles County that was recently thrown thrown out on his ass, is doing a terrible job prosecuting cases. That is not really on Governor Gavin Newsom in the state of California, because he doesn't control Gascon. The same is true for Pamela Price in Alameda County. So we talk about crime on a local level, on a citywide level, because the officials that engage with and deal with crime are local and on a city level. Now, that is not to say that there aren't state laws that can hamstring local officials. That's 100% true. That's why we talk about those laws specifically. Prop 47, which was repealed at a statewide level, is an example of a statewide law that has a negative impact on everywhere in the state of California, and specifically makes bad crime situations like in Oakland, like in Los Angeles, significantly worse. New York State bail reform is another example of one of these policies. Now, the reason why Cenk's nephew doesn't want to talk about this, the reason why he wants to deflect to the statewide level, to people who don't have much to do with the problems that he's refusing to address, is because what you find out is even in those red states, you have blue cities that are responsible for the overwhelming majority of the crime. On top of that, because black people commit more crime, what you end up finding out is that the states typically, although it is not a one-to-one comparison, with higher black populations tend to have higher rates of violent crime. Again, it is not one-to-one, to be clear about that. New York City has something like 2 million black people, and they are actually one of the safest cities because black people in New York City offend at lower rates, significantly so, than the city of Chicago, who offend at lower rates, significantly so, than people in New Orleans or Baltimore or whatever. But what we're actually talking about, what we're actually discussing, is criminal cities that are typically run for decades by Democrats and run badly by them, and that's why we talk about crime and engage with it at a local level. Cenk's nephew should know this. He may or may not know this. The guy is profoundly stupid, but this is a common deflection away from the problems, and again, it says nothing to the increases in crime that people are concerned about in Los Angeles. To give you an idea of how pointless it is to talk about Mississippi, Louisiana, or whatever when discussing crime in Los Angeles or crime in the state of California, I have this perfect analogy for you. Let's say you discover one day that your running water in your home is not working, and you decide to tell Cenk's nephew, hey, listen, buddy, my running water, it's failing in my home, and somebody should come and fix it. But Cenk's nephew decides to tell you, well, guess what? I know somebody in the state of Mississippi or some other state across the country from you that not only doesn't have running water, but they don't have electricity, and also they don't have a roof on their house. So I guess that solves your running water problem, because somebody else somewhere else in the country is in a worse situation than you. Now, obviously that doesn't solve it. Obviously that doesn't address the issue. It is just a pointless exercise from somebody who fancies himself to be an intellectual, but in reality is actually incredibly stupid.
Also, the reason why Californians themselves genuinely believe that this is also happening and no one is addressing it,
because it's actually happening.
No, it's because of what they perceive to be what they perceive to be is disorder and dysfunction and crime that is happening in every orifice of blue cities.
So
it's homeless, it's poverty, it's visible aspects of extreme poverty that in many instances can actually be a crime or will sometimes be criminalized. Homelessness, trash on the streets. You see someone doing drugs on the corner of the street.
Extreme left positions that are this.
So here we have another deflection from Cenk's nephew where he says, listen, what people are seeing as a crime increase in the state of California isn't actually a crime increase. It's just an increase in homelessness, an increase in drug users, an increase in trash on the street. And in reality, that is not actually crime, but people think it's crime because I guess they're dumb. Now we're going to go into the data in Los Angeles specifically. I will show you. And by the way, Cenk brings it up. He forces Cenk's nephew to bring it up on stream that crime is up in Los Angeles. It is up in the state of California. It has been up compared to 2019, as Cenk has laid out over and over and over again. But Cenk's nephew is saying, well, look, this is a huge issue and all that, and Gavin Newsom is not doing what he needs to do. And he kind of glosses over the fact that Gavin Newsom is 100% in agreement with him on Prop 47.
Gavin Newsom, the extreme leftist.
But he does agree with you guys. He
No,
was
he
on
doesn't.
your side on Prop 36.
Gavin Newsom?
He was
Gavin
on your
Newsom,
side on Prop 36.
the person who physically went and cleared a homeless encampment
but
is
only
on my
after he
side.
encouraged them for 3 to 4 years straight.
No,
because he thought you guys were right.
In fact, we did an entire video on how Gavin Newsom tried to kill the repeal of Prop 47 and had all these different various dirty tricks that he wanted to utilize in order to prevent it from being stopped because he thought Prop 47 was his legacy. Now, Cenk says he's been fighting for it for 4 years, but that's actually not true. He's been fighting for it since 2014, since he was a San Francisco official, because Gavin Newsom believes that this is a part of his legacy and he's willing to sacrifice Californians in order to protect himself politically and set himself up for a presidential run. And 100% he is on the side that Cenk's nephew is on. But let's talk about him ranting related to housing, because this is unrelated, but it also shows that the guy's an idiot in that category.
You and I are in agreement if we fucking hate Gavin Newsom, but maybe not on the same fucking basis. I hate Gavin Newsom because he refused time and time again, despite numerous ballot measures that wanted to fix one of the most significant, most consequential aspects of why homelessness persists in a state like California. He refused to do it because he's backed by the same corporate investors that say, do not fix the housing market. Do not touch the housing market at all. Housing costs must always go up.
So one of the things that you need to understand about Cenk's nephew and all these left-wingers is that their analysis is very superficial. So they just talked about the price of housing in the state of California being so high because corporations and corporate interests want it to always go up, and that's really bad. Damn those corporations. Now, to be clear, there are corporate interests that definitely benefit from elevated prices in housing. That is 100% true. But there are also corporate interests, builders, for an example, that definitely don't benefit from all the rules, regulations, and restrictions in the state of California and would be lobbying against that. And just so you guys know, they definitely have a huge amount of money in order to do so. In fact, a bunch of different various industries are against California's very strict and rigid zoning laws and all the different various things that prevent them from being able to build housing. The thing is, the real driver of the price of housing in the state of California is the homeowners themselves. I hate to break it to you guys, but it is not corporate interests overall that benefit from having all this single family zoning and preventing new developments from going up. It is the people who already own property in the state of California who absolutely benefit from all these different rules and regulations in order to keep the price of their house up. On top of that, they have all these environmental considerations like CEQA. People have done entire reviews of this. In fact, the California state government puts one out every so often, realizing that, yes, this law is a major driver in the price of housing because it allows individuals to sue developers, saying that they're going to negatively impact their environment, and that can bog down these cases for sometimes decades and essentially delay development. So almost all of the rules and regulations that prevent people from actually building cheap, affordable housing in the state of California come from individuals, come from homeowners and the way that they vote, not from corporations, to be clear.
The number one reason why homelessness persists, the number one reason why homelessness exists is because people get priced out of the market. When people get priced out of the market, they start living in their cars. When you start living in your car, you no longer have access to running water. You can't clean yourself. You lose your job. Your job attainment goes away. When you lose your job, you fall further down that pit until you arrive at the homeless guy that has been traumatized by fucking living outside and looks like a crazy person, is probably fucking experiencing significant mental health complications and doing drugs to self-medicate in that process, and everyone sees that and goes, that's crime. Why is no one fixing this? No. And that is the major issue.
So for Cenk's nephew to say that corporations are pricing people out of the market and that causes them to become hobos, and then because they can't shower, they get fired from their job, and then they end up getting mental illnesses from living on the street, and then they end up getting addicted to drugs in order to fix those mental illnesses, is absurd. Again, notice how he takes away all agency from the individuals from their own circumstances rather than address the core issue at hand. And of course, this is a deflection from crime and an excuse for them to commit crimes, and it's wildly inappropriate. The fact of the matter is, the reason why homelessness persists in the state of California is, of course, they have issues with affordable housing, which we have talked about on this channel before, but fundamentally, the number one reason is because California allows people to be homeless on their streets. They make it comfortable for them. They have a nonprofit industrial complex that, of course, they wasted $24 billion on that they cannot account for in order to provide homeless services to these individuals. So the very same programs that Cenk's nephew advocates for in order to help these people on the street, all these different harm reduction programs like giving them crack pipes so they can get high better, those programs end up incentivizing people to be homeless, incentivizing them to be on the streets. And of course, there is no enforcement mechanism in order to remove them from the streets because the ACLU keeps suing for all these different various homeless rights. If you actually cleaned up your housing regulations, if you actually got rid of some of your environmental regulations, guess what? You would be able to build affordable housing. But if you had the enforcement to get these people off the streets, to stop them from littering the streets, to stop them from being on the streets, being mentally ill, getting addicted to drugs, which ultimately ends up leading to them committing crimes, then you would see better results.
I haven't gotten in here in like 20 minutes. So let me address crime.
First of all, you've definitely talked a lot more than me. I've given you all the space.
Okay, listen. So let me address crime, then we'll get to homelessness. So on crime, you have to separate out national numbers from local numbers. Why? Because Tennessee didn't do the same things as California and New York did. So you have to look at, okay, when they tried different things, how did it work out? So the national numbers are totally irrelevant. So when you get to California, I looked it up this morning because I knew we were going to have this discussion. So pre-pandemic to now, violent crime up 15%, homicide up 15%. By the way, crime is complicated. Not every number goes up and down in the way that you would expect, or goes up all at once or goes down all at once.
What year to year are you comparing?
2019 to now, okay? So like, because we did a lot of the reforms in 2020, okay? But it's also complicated because the pandemic actually drove crime as well.
So Cenk starts laying out the numbers, and I'm just going to tell you they are accurate. They are looked up later on by Cenk's nephew, and Cenk's nephew asked him, what year to year are you comparing? And he says 2019 to now, and he's saying crime is up since the Black Lives Matter riots, since the criminal justice reforms. Now, Cenk unnecessarily undercuts his position by saying, oh, look, well, the pandemic happened too, and that caused crime to go up. And while I have said time and time again, it's not nothing, it's not a factor in terms of the crime increase, but the data actually doesn't really bear that out. Crime was going down during the lockdowns up until late May, early June of 2020. The reason why there was a significant change, and by the way, this significant change can be seen in the homicide stats in Los Angeles. It can be seen in the nationwide homicide stats as well, statewide in terms of California, is because of the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter riots. That caused a chain reaction that led to cops being pulled off the streets. It led to a bunch of different cops resigning from their posts, going into early retirement. And guess what? The lack of police on the beat ended up leading to a dramatic spike in crime.
So there was a number of different factors that did. But did crime go up? You're saying no, it's just a narrative. It didn't really go up, but it did.
No.
So violent crime went up 15%. Homicide went up 15%. Hold on, let me finish. Well, no. This is overall last 4 years, okay? So, yeah, it was spiked in 2020 and 2021.
Yes.
Then it started to slowly come down, and last year it came down a little bit. But now, where is it? It's still 15% higher than when we started on violent and crime and homicide. And from where we started, it's now up 29% on retail theft, 43% on auto theft, and 52% on car accessory theft. Those are real. People feel that. Everybody's had their catalytic converters stolen. Everybody's dealt with minor crime that wasn't an issue before, but is an issue now. Those numbers are real. So when you say to them, oh, no, it's just a narrative, and they're like, God damn it, man, my uncle got robbed and I go to the CVS and I can't get a goddamn toothpaste. You're saying CVS, imagine that bullshit, right? And so when you are telling them, don't believe your lying eyes, don't believe the numbers, you should believe me, it's just a false narrative, they don't believe you, and they were right. And so when you saw in the elections, it wasn't that the right wing tricked the people of California.
So yeah, what Cenk's saying is 100% true. And Cenk's nephew tried to do the thing that we often see, which is, hey, after that dramatic increase in crime, again, nationwide, it was 30%. We saw a decline in criminality. I mean, it was like a 2% decline, which still means we're up overall dramatically, but no big deal. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to see here. Everybody just forget about the fact that we used to be at a significantly lower level. and after the implementation of a bunch of leftist reforms in the criminal justice system, crime is elevated. And to be clear, we're going to go directly into the data for Los Angeles because Cenk wants to talk about local numbers so you can understand in real terms what Cenk's nephew is trying to argue versus the reality of the situation. So this is the homicide numbers from 2012 to 2022 according to the LAPD. So obviously this covers Los Angeles. And what you can see is that in 2019, there were 258 homicides recorded in Los Angeles. That jumped to 355. It jumped again to 397. And then there was a slight decrease to 382. And this is what Cenk's nephew tends to highlight, that slight decrease after the dramatic increase. Now, another chart right here shows the homicide rate in the state of California and the city of Los Angeles. And what you can see is that in the city of Los Angeles in 2019, it was slightly above 6 per 100,000. In the state of California, it was slightly above 4 per 100,000. Now, what you see is a dramatic jump where it got above 10 per 100,000, remained that way for 2022, and then it dropped to above 8 per 100,000. And this is again the decrease that Cenk's nephew is celebrating. And you could see a similar trend, although a smaller variance in the statewide numbers, but it is also still clearly and obviously elevated. Now, Cenk's nephew wants you to just take note of the fact that in 2022, it was at 10 per 100,000, and then it went down to above 8 per 100,000. Therefore, crime down, Yukons are totally owned, and there's no crime problem at all. But like I always say, when people tell you that crime is down, the follow-up question that you need to ask is down compared to what? What we saw in 2020, 2021, and 2022 was one of the most dramatic spikes in crime in American history compared to the previous years. So you saying that it's down because there was a slight decrease after a dramatic increase doesn't actually give us a better picture on where we were before and after these criminal justice reforms, which were largely instituted in 2020. And as you can see, when you compare the 2019 numbers, the pre-Black Lives Matter riot numbers, to the current situation, homicide is up by 2 per 100,000, which is a dramatic increase in just a couple of years. Cenk's nephew is in denial of this. Cenk is trying to lay out this case, but of course, he has to dodge, deflect, and get away from this. And by the way, we've seen similar results nationwide, and even the decrease that is in the national numbers in 2022 has recently been revised to show us that we're still significantly elevated as compared to the pre-Black Lives Matter riot levels. And by the way, if you guys are confused why I continuously refer to this as the pre-Black Lives Matter riot levels versus the post-Black Lives Matter riot levels, is that you see this over and over again, and it is represented in the California/Los Angeles data, is that crime was actually going down during the year of the pandemic, up and through the lockdowns, up until late May of that year when George Floyd died, and in June and in the remainder of the year, that's when we saw the elevated homicides. So no, it's not due to the lockdowns, it's not due to the pandemic, it is in fact due to the Black Lives Matter riots, the George Floyd effect.
And Haas, this is so important because in 2020, they tried a ballot measure that was very similar to Prop 36, okay, to repeal Prop 47, which is what reduced penalties, right? And it failed. It only got 38%. Why? Because the people had not yet felt the crime, okay? And after 2020, when the crime actually went up, they felt the crime, they experienced the crime, and they voted against the crime. None of that was narrative. It was real. And it had a massive effect on the elections in California.
So Cenk ends up saying something that I totally and wholly disagree with, which is the reason why the repeal of Prop 47 failed in 2020 versus 2024 is because people didn't feel the weight or the impact of the crime increase post the criminal justice reforms. This is just not the case. The reason why this failed in 2020 is because the trend in 2020 was going towards these woke George Soros district attorneys, these left-wing policies on a statewide level, and because of that trend being fueled by the hysteria related to the George Floyd incident and the Black Lives Matter riots, that is why people voted for these reforms overwhelmingly in that year. So even when you had a repeal of the already problematic Prop 47, it was doomed to fail in that time frame, and the reason why is because people were in the mood to say everything is wrong with the police and we need to let all the criminals out because they're innocent baby angel Aladdins.
As far as retail theft, is a conversation. We've had this conversation already, that retail theft is down, and not only is retail theft down, I don't know where you're getting your numbers from, but retail
which
theft,
time period?
Retail theft in terms of like organized retail theft, in terms of crime across the board, even in 2020, the actual theft crime is like not the violent crime and homicides. Homicides were the only thing that spiked, okay, which is pretty consequential. It's pretty significant. Even homicides have also gone down since the major blip that they experienced in it post 2020 and 2021.
So this is the first mention from Cenk's nephew of organized retail theft, and we're going to get into why his talking points on that are ridiculous and absurd in just a moment, but I do want to point out that he's doing the thing that I just called out, which is saying homicide is down compared to the spike, and he calls it a blip in 2020, so everything's fine. But again, it's down compared to the greatest year-over-year increase in American history, and it's only down slightly, and it is still up on net compared to 2019, which is what Cenk's talking about. It's what I'm talking about. It's what everybody who's serious about crime is talking about, and Cenk's nephew is just dropping a crime denial tactic that is not surprising. Again, if you had 10 murders in a specific area, and then it jumped to 100 in that particular area, and then the next year it dropped down to 90 from that 100, it is still technically down from the peak, from the blip. But guess what? If you compared it to the year where there was just 10 murders, it's dramatically up. This is what people are concerned about. This is what Cenk's nephew is trying to weasel around, because the guy is a rat. The guy is a fraud. And I also will take note of the fact that Cenk's nephew is highly edited in this version that is posted on his channel to cut out his ums and all the things that make him sound incredibly stupid, and that is still not helping him.
As far as retail theft goes, many of the places that claimed that there was organized retail theft occurring openly recognized that they were, using that as a way to massage their numbers. The real shrink that increased was completely adjusted to the increased foot traffic. I mean,
so
this
you're
is not
showing
even
an article from 2020. I gave you the numbers from the last 4 years.
I know. I'm giving you. I'm showing you that this is the article that I'm showing that says shootings and killings are up.
So first and foremost, I just want to point out a couple of things. You have a Business Insider article that an excerpt of it is being put up on screen by Cenk's nephew's editor that purports to actually prove what he just said, but in reality, it definitely doesn't. It says that retail theft is the scapegoat for businesses, but in reality, when you read the article, this is completely unrelated to what's being talked about, what's being discussed, and again, has nothing to do with the state of California, what Cenk Uygur is actually talking about, and the issues of retail theft as it pertains to that state and the many cities within that state. Again, let me read this for you so you can see how deceptive this is. Employee theft accounted for 29% of shrink, the report said. Another 27% came from, quote, process, control failures, and errors. It added, in other words, retailers' shortcomings in tracking their inventory. During the pandemic, many stores saw shrink go down. William Blair, analyst, wrote in a research note in October, fewer people were shopping in person, which likely led to fewer thefts. Many turned to delivery services such as Instacart to get food and other essentials. Now, once you actually pause this and read it, you might be asking yourself, what the hell does this have to do with anything? We're talking about thefts and crimes that spiked post the Black Lives Matter riots, and obviously I just told you that pre the Black Lives Matter riots, crime was going down, theft included, and yes, there weren't a lot of people in the stores, but that doesn't account for the fact that these thefts went up after this point, after the point of this article, which is something that Cenk Uygur ends up highlighting. Also, I just want to point out that 29% plus 27% is 56%, which means that 44% of the things that went missing, even according to this, would be due to in-person theft, which sounds like a lot, sounds like an increase, is very dramatic in my opinion, but Cenk's nephew kind of dodges and weaves around that as well because the guy is a liar.
It was completely adjusted to the increased foot traffic. I mean,
so
this
you're
is not
showing
even
an article from 2020. I just gave you the numbers from the last 4 years.
I know. I'm giving you. I'm showing you that this is the article that I'm showing that says shootings and killings are up, even in that time frame.
Right. So I just gave you the definitive numbers in the last 4 years in California. So it did go up.
Now again, it is notable how weaselly Cenk's nephew operates. He ends up pulling up numbers from July 20th of 2020, numbers in an article from then. So these are the preliminary numbers on criminality, which shows, by the way, that violent crime was spiking, specifically homicides and shootings. However, the crimes of supposed economic desperation were not actually seeing a significant uptick because, spoiler alert, this is an innocent baby angel Aladdin stealing in order to feed their starving kids.
And Haas, like
the reason we're having a conversation that not only is wrong, it's something that the people that actually the people themselves admitted to why it was wrong. That at the time I looked at the situation, I looked at the organized retail theft, I looked at the National Retailers Association numbers, and I adjusted shrink and the percentages that contribute to shrink, and found out that the overarching number of thefts that were occurring were not actually happening as a direct consequence of like organized retail theft, because no one is going to be able to steal billions of dollars worth of merchandise by organizing retail theft. It was actually happening, and you might like this, you might appreciate this, because of fucking automation. It was happening because normal Americans, when they go into a store and they do self-checkout, which is more beneficial for corporations because now you don't have to pay benefits for cashiers. Now you don't have to, pay a whole bunch of people to actually sit at the cash register. Now you don't have to do workers' comp. Now you don't have to do paid, family leave or anything like that, or no health care. Now you just have an automated machine that one person is controlling every now and then. In that process, they realized that shrink would actually go up, because people would just go in and maybe put a Snickers bar in there and toss it in their bag. That is why shrink went up.
So the number of ways that Cenk's nephew is being deceptive here are too numerous to count. It is to absurd degrees. First and foremost, this should be obvious to everyone. If you're stealing from the self-checkout, you are in fact still stealing. But secondly, I want to take note of the source that Cenk's nephew brought up, because it's from an article by this place called Deolit, or I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's an outlet that I never heard of. And that got me thinking, that got me curious, so I decided to look it up. And what I ultimately discovered is that this article is referring to an increase in shrink due to self-checkout in the United Kingdom, not in the United States of America, and not in the state of California. Yes, we have seen increases in thefts in the United States of America in places where you have self-checkout, which is why Walmart, among other companies, is pulling out the self-checkout machines. But the idea that you're going to cite and highlight that this is just accidental based on an article from the UK is absurd in every possible way. And yet again, another deceptive crime denial from Cenk's nephew that has no connection to what we're talking about. On top of that, the reason why I highlighted this section from Cenk's nephew's own article that they put up in post-production is that one of the factors that they blame for the rise in retail crime, again in the United Kingdom, is the lack of custodial sentencing for shoplifting to act as a deterrent in the United Kingdom. So essentially, because they've gone soft on this particular crime, they're not putting repeat shoplifters in jail. Guess what? They get more shoplifting. So even this totally irrelevant article that talks about shoplifting and a little bit about self-checkout in the United Kingdom also points out that you need to hold repeat offenders accountable. Cenk's nephew, you're a fool from top to bottom. You're an embarrassment in every way.
No,
okay,
Haas,
that is the real reason why shrink went up, or on the theft side. Okay,
two things can be true at the same time. So that point about shrinkage and automation is absolutely right. And the right wing totally ignores that. You are right to bring it up. But that doesn't mean that the actual theft at the retail level didn't happen. Number one, the numbers indicate that it happened. Number two, the idea that CVS, Walgreens, all these guys were just decided to pretend that the people were going to steal this stuff and start locking it up when they weren't actually stealing it is crazy. They were actually stealing it. No, people, that's why they locked it up.
I know.
Do you agree with that?
Yes.
So without going into the fact that Cenk's nephew is citing UK numbers that have nothing to do with anything, he ends up hitting him with the point, which is, yes, we can see it in the data, we see it in the reporting data, we see it in the store's own data, but Cenk's nephew is still harping on this idea that it's not organized, which again has nothing to do with the theft overall. Organized retail theft is something that is determined by by investigators, not by initial reports. And what Cenk's nephew is trying to harp on is that in one report from the National Retailers Federation, they had an improper amount attributed to organized retail theft that was actually contradicted in the very same paper that they put out later on. And in fact, this still does not say that the amount that they're attributing to theft is wrong. It just says that the amount that can be attributed to organized retail thieves is likely not where it was estimated, again, in that one release that they put out where they had two contradicting numbers in the same release. So no, the theft still happened. It was still a problem. It just happened to be because of a bunch of petty thieves or disorganized retail theft, and it doesn't change the fact that this is happening.
But,
okay, so
but
both
you
of those
can't
things are
make
true.
up for billions of dollars in lost revenue.
But when
from
people
the
go to a CVS and that
700
shit's locked up, they get super mad.
I know, and it goes back to literally the same exact thing that we were talking about with respect to seeing homeless people and being like, this is crime. Crime is everywhere, and instilling a sense
But
of
crime
panic.
is everywhere. And look. So now let's go to homeless
So, but
people.
you're talking about organized retail theft when this conversation has already, like, we've closed the book on that. That, like,
No.
CEOs and CFOs have
even before
openly
we go to homeless people. But look, let's
openly
talk
have
about the
said-
substance. Let's talk about the substance.
they've openly said that they lied about it. Like,
No.
Yes,
Haas,
they did. This
no,
article
Haas.
is literally that.
Haas, no.
Maybe.
Look, you're cherry picking.
I'm not.
And you're getting to a point that they admitted something that they did wrong that I agree with you on. But I'm telling you that two things can be true at the same time.
So Cenk's nephew is saying, look, they admitted that they were lying. They admitted that they were lying. No, one executive on one Walgreens call said maybe we were overestimating how bad the theft was, specifically in Walgreens store locations. But again, Walgreens stores are closing. They're closing due to a litany of factors. But you know what doesn't help any of those factors? The increase in retail theft. So one of the factors that I'm talking about is rent increases in their brick and mortar locations, competition from the internet, competition from Amazon. You also have higher interest rates. So if they are using debt in order to finance these locations, they're paying more for that. But guess what? If you're profitable despite all those things, or you could stay afloat despite all of those things, and then you deal with an increase in theft, that is a reason why your locations are closing. So yes, there are other factors. We all understand that. We can all grasp that concept. What Cenk's nephew can't grasp is that theft definitely plays a role. And yes, when theft gets above a certain percentage, these retailers have to close their doors.
But the crime is also correct.
No,
when you go to the substance of the actual laws, I voted yes on Prop 36. Did you vote no on Prop 36?
Prop 36 was the
increasing the penalties.
increasing the penalties. Yeah, I voted no on it. Yes.
Yeah, so we have a disagreement.
Yeah.
So what were the penalties?
And a perfect example of what I'm talking about right here is that Cenk's nephew brings up this article where it says Target blames theft for the closure of 9 locations, but theft is actually higher in some of the other locations that remained open. And again, it's not about the raw number of theft. Again, if you have more business to counteract that theft, then guess what? You can stay open. But if you have a location that has in raw numbers less theft, but that represents a greater percentage of what is going on in that location, the store is going to close. These people try to deny this reality over and over and over again, when for normal people, for people with brains, it is such a basic concept to grasp. You have to assume that they're either being incredibly disingenuous or stupid, or both. And honestly, you guys can just pick which one it is. But yeah, this is clearly understandable to everyone.
I said for theft under $950, if you've done it 3 times, then we're going to move it to a felony instead of a misdemeanor.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Okay.
I disagree.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's because.
Do you want to know why I disagree? Do
of
you
course.
care?
Yeah, of course I do. Yeah.
So a couple things. This also goes back to narrative overcomes truth, and narrative is more important than truth. If I were to tell you that the state of Texas has less stringent rules on what constitutes a felony theft than the state of California, which has implemented the $900 policy since like 2014, and it's not a recent introduction into California state law, would you be surprised to find that out?
But those two things are crossed together, Huss, because when everybody talks about how California changed the laws and now you can go steal things that are under $950 all day long and it's a misdemeanor, and since it's a misdemeanor, they're going to plead you down to nothing. you publicize that, then everybody goes, shit, let's go steal some stuff because apparently it's totally fine now, and more people go and steal. So that is where the reality meets the narrative.
So you're saying that the media coverage over this has led to an increase of people going out and stealing stuff.
Both things are true. That the laws were changed, it did make it easier to steal, and then the media covered it, and then more people stole because the media covered it, and they're like, oh, it turns out you could just steal and get away with it.
So now again, Cenk makes a good point right here. California's $950 limit for when a theft churns from a misdemeanor to a felony is actually not the issue at hand. The issue at hand is that they never prosecute misdemeanor theft at all whatsoever. You have a bunch of woke district attorneys that give these people slaps on the wrist, so people keep repeat offending because there's no consequences. So having a rule where if you commit under $950 thefts multiple times, you can escalate to a felony could eventually lead to enough deterrence in order to prevent that. Because again, a misdemeanor means under a year in jail. A felony means anything above a year in jail. So if you're not putting anybody convicted of multiple misdemeanors, not even pursuing those cases, in jail for any kind of period of time, then yes, they are going to operate as if there's no consequences. So Texas or any other state could have a higher or lower threshold for what constitutes a felony grand theft. It doesn't matter as long as they're prosecuting the misdemeanors, as long as they're holding people accountable for these thefts. That will have the deterrent effect, especially since a huge proportion of the thefts are being committed by a very small group of individuals, which I will go over when Cenk's nephew denies that fact.
You and I agree that, like, I'm not saying that no theft has occurred. Of course, it did. We've all seen the videos, right? You and I, on the other hand, do agree that the larger, more consequential increase in shrink came from automation and not like organized retail theft. I think you would agree to that.
Yeah,
because it's impossible.
On the scale of the numbers, I hear you.
First of all, it's not due to automation, you absolute idiot. Just because there is a self-checkout in a store doesn't mean that you have to steal from the store. It is still due to individuals stealing from the store. That is what is causing the losses. And your citation of people in the UK accidentally not scanning the appropriate stuff has nothing to do with anything. And Cenk should not concede that framing to his nephew.
I haven't looked at it myself, but that sounds right.
It is mathematically impossible for organized retail theft to contribute billions of dollars in lost revenue, because it would have to literally be like pandemonium, because the things that you're stealing, the things that you're stealing are not expensive enough. Like, they're not stealing gold bars, they're stealing deodorant.
So Cenk's nephew says, oh, it's so impossible for these organized retail thieves because the items are so inexpensive for them to steal enough for that to add up to billions of dollars. And I will just point out a couple of things. First and foremost, as we talked about, the organized retail theft is overstated. Everybody acknowledges that, but the theft numbers are still there. Secondly, it's not just CVS, it's not just Walgreens. So this happens at a bunch of different high-end stores where they come in and they steal tens of thousands of dollars worth of clothing incredibly quickly in these places and sell them. So yes, that does represent big chunks of it.
Like, you're pairing up numbers that don't actually add up to a hyper specific anecdote of a serial criminal that you've made up in your mind. You're making
I'm not
it
making
seem
it up.
as,
It's in the numbers.
No, it's not in the numbers, because we disagree. I think the broader the broader scope of this analysis requires you to look at the actual ways in which retail theft is occurring and what is the actual contributor to the problem.
A huge percentage of the crime is committed by recidivists. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but you guys could look it up.
No, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not one. There's no world in which one singular person is responsible, or 1,000 people are responsible for the brunt of the overwhelming majority of shrink, majority of retail theft.
But in addition to that, the thieves that are stealing little petty items, a small number of them represent a huge portion of the thefts in any given city. Remember, we have this headline and this article from the New York Post that documents the 327 people that represent 30% of the retail theft arrests in the city of New York. And we're talking about 22,000 retail thefts. And by the way, if you look at this chart from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, you could see that post bail reform, the amount of retail theft has gone up overwhelmingly to levels that are absolutely ridiculous and absurd. Just look at the chart for yourself. So yes, a small group of individuals are having a wildly disproportionate effect on the retail market, and the same is true for Los Angeles, and the same is true for most areas. It is a certain amount of criminals that are repeat offenders that are doing this over and over and over again, which is something that Cenk Uygur points out, although his nephew denies it.
Over time, the real ways in which this happens is if this is a mass pattern change and a mass attitude change that makes it easier to steal small things here and there. Those numbers add up in a significantly larger way to the overall shrink of the companies. They know that. They already baked that into their profit margins because it's still cheaper for them to lay off a ton of their employees and allow some people to fucking steal, and it contributes to the shrink.
Now again, Cenk's nephew goes right back into denial, just saying, oh, it's an increase in foot traffic, not an increase in theft, when the data shows time and time again that yes, it is an increase in theft. In terms of dollar amount, the amount that's being stolen per item or per theft incident, and in the number of incidents, the frequency of incidents. And this is reflected in the crime data in the state of California. It is reflected more strongly in the cities where they have woke district attorneys or they had woke district attorneys, and nobody should be surprised by this.
The people of California en masse all got tricked by the right wing into thinking there was crime when there wasn't that much crime.
I think that people saw homelessness and diminishing material conditions for a lot of working class Californians and it's not an accident that like blue areas and blue cities are significantly more like swinging to the right than red cities were, or red states were in general. They saw homelessness directly caused by the housing market being completely unsustainable, and they attributed that to an increase of violent crime happening everywhere and it being bedlam when the data doesn't show that reality at all. And to make up for that massive gap in the data, to make up for the massive gap in the data by saying, oh, people are simply not reporting crimes when we're talking
but I'm
about.
telling you, the data does back it up. I've proven it overwhelmingly.
I don't know.
And then on top of that, there's another mountain of unreported crime. But I don't even need the unreported crime.
So Cenk's nephew also says people just saw an increase in poverty, a decrease in their material conditions, and they assume that was due to crime, even though that's completely and wholly inaccurate. Now, this is absurd for a number of reasons. First and foremost, the increase in crime is in fact real. But secondly, the increase in crime drives poverty. It increases poverty when you allow criminals to run roughshod. When these stores close, people lose their jobs. People have to spend money or more money on the remaining stores that stay open due to the fact that the theft transfers over there. They have less options. And of course, the theft increases prices overall. And when people are victimized by criminals, guess what? That pushes them further into poverty. I've talked about getting my own car stolen during this year, and I talked about how I do pretty well on this channel, so I was able to recover from it. But obviously, if you're a regular ordinary person and you don't have your car fully paid off like I did, you can't take the money that was given to you by the insurance company and immediately apply that to getting yourself a new vehicle. It was a used vehicle, but a new used vehicle in my case. Then you are going to be totally screwed over, because guess what? You're going to have to finance a new car based on the new interest rates, the higher interest rates, and that is going to put you in a significantly worse position financially. So this is due to the fact that we have increases in crime, increases in car theft, increases in car parts theft all over this nation. And Cenk's nephew is just saying, oh, people just sensed a decrease in material conditions and blame crime. No, many of these people have that decrease in their standard of living because of the criminal.
The crime went up. Look.
I don't know where your data is coming from.
Public Policy Institute of California. So you could look it up. Crime on the cars, 43% on auto theft over the last 4 years, 52% on car parts, and you keep telling them it didn't happen when their catalytic converter got stolen. They know it happened. Now let's go to homelessness. So that's again like the trans ad at the end of the campaign. It's in my opinion, it's a combination.
The Public
of the
Policy
corporate.
Institute of California, is that what you're talking about? Is that where you got this information from?
Yeah.
That California's violent crime rate rose somewhat in 2023 and remains above pre-pandemic levels. This is what you're talking about,
So
right?
look, keep going down. You see,
Okay.
right? So
California's
for
overall
example,
violent crime rate by 1.7 increased by 1.7 from 495 crimes in 2020 to 503 in 2023.
Yep.
Like the rest of the nation, California saw a jump in violent crime in the first year of the pandemic. The state's violent crime rate is still up by 15.4% compared to 2019. This is what you're talking
what
about.
I said. 15% since 2019.
Okay.
And
Fair.
then you see violent crime, you see homicide, you see home burglaries go down, but
So this is
commercial burglaries go up.
Now, Cenk's nephew says, I don't know where you're getting your data from, uncle, and his own editor, who was basically pulling up nonsense from the UK in order to support him, betrays him in this instance by pulling up the example of his data right there on the screen, and you see Cenk's California numbers are accurate. Now, of course, you see there is a decrease in the 2023 numbers as compared to the previous year, 2022, but compared to the pre-Black Lives Matter riot period, crime is still up 15%, as Cenk said.
What you're doing in this situation is basically looking at just this portion.
Because
okay?
that is what the voters look at when they're going into this
and not
election.
looking at, I know, but you're not looking at the overall trends of crime.
I know, but I've pointed that out 1,000 times.
I know, but
that trend that happened in the 1990s has nothing to do with the trend since
it's
2020.
not just 19.
Now, it's funny because Cenk's nephew ends up pulling up the numbers. He ends up reading them. They prove out Cenk Uygur's point. And then later on, he says something weaselly, which is, oh, I could tell you why those numbers aren't real in a moment. Just give me a second and I'll be able to tell you. And I think this is a solid point to end this conversation right here, because it is proof positive that Cenk's nephew is a crime denier. That is his job. He wants to deflect off of this issue so that nobody can call him out for his failed policies, acting exactly as people on the right predict. However, he wants the left to just continuously lie about this because the data and all the numbers and people's attitudes are not aligned with the progressive position. And his argument is, and has always been, if something is inconvenient, just try to reframe it to the point where you can make your case for your policies, no matter how wrong-headed and foolish they actually are. But I want to know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. If you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Cenk's nephew getting schooled by his uncle on Thanksgiving. Till next time.